Mary for DVD Geeks, and with me is Roger Nygard, who is the director of The Nature of Existence, a new documentary that questions why are we here. And you're also known for Trekkies and
Most notorious,
Trekkie
probably, for Trekkies.
How are they similar?
Well, The Nature of Existence is very similar to Trekkies in that they're both portraits of subcultures of humanity. But to me, they're really comedies because humanity is funny. If, life is absurd, and if you don't laugh, you go insane.
Do you find that the same level of passion existed in your subjects in Trekkies and also in Nature of Existence?
Yeah, I guess, comparing Star Trek fans to Jainists or Sikhs or Catholics, there is, in a lot of ways, Star Trek, people who like Star Trek, it's almost a religious following because there is a philosophy that underlies Star Trek, and that's part of what unifies Star Trek fandom. So there is a lot of similarity.
So in what ways do you feel like traveling the world and meeting people for the international, Trekkies too, led you to this?
In a lot of ways, The Nature of Existence is an exact remake of Trekkies 2. Structurally, it's the same thing. Traveling the world, asking people theme questions. What's the point of everything? Is there an afterlife? Where is God? Define God. Versus, what is normal for a Star Trek fan? When is it okay to wear your uniform in public? Trekkie or Trekker? What's the right term?
Right.
It's the same kind of idea, except it's a different group of people.
So what were you most surprised to hear? Who surprised you the most of all your subjects?
I was constantly surprised. My neighbor's daughter surprised me,
I
for
loved
instance.
her. Yeah, she was so smart.
She was very unexpected. And I learned so much, like the Jainists, for instance. Their whole concept is about nonviolence. And that's a lot where, like in India, there's a lot of vegetarian food, right? And it comes from the fact that they will not kill anything with 5 senses. So I didn't know any of that. I knew very little about these people before I started my journey. And whether it's Jainists or Buddhists or Sikhs, what's a Sikh? Do you know what a Sikh is? I knew nothing about them before I started, but now I have a new understanding with that, a new respect for what they believe.
Now, did you find you had to open up with some softball questions going in? Because, it's very personal to ask somebody about their beliefs.
Normally, that's what I would do. In this case, I violated that rule, and I started with the biggest question right off the top. Why do we exist? And then I would work my way down from there. But then I would end every interview with kind of the same question, just rephrased slightly.
Sure.
Is the world a better place for having had human beings in it? So those are the two bookends. In the middle, we got into a lot of the fun stuff, like where was God during the Holocaust?
Right.
Great questions like that, those classics.
Now, you mentioned food earlier, and I noticed in the documentary, food seems to be a through line, everywhere, people break bread. So how important was it to you to have that kind of fun element to it?
Yeah, food is a big part of the film because it's a big part for me. I mean, there's a metaphor of pancakes in the movie. I remember when I was a child, for me, sitting through church was sort of a countdown to brunch. So my parents would starve us, no breakfast until after church. So the whole time I'm sitting there thinking, when is the food? How much more time to pancakes?
Sure.
And it's about being in the moment. Right? When you're eating and when you're enjoying food, it's about being present and being in the moment. And that's a big lesson that I learned. And it's a big part of philosophy and spirituality, which is about being in the moment.
Sure. Now, is there anyone that was on your list of people to interview that you just absolutely couldn't get, but you wish you had?
I got very close to the Pope.
Oh, wow.
I had some questions. I got within about 6 feet of the Pope, and you see that in the movie. I get to shout some questions out to him. Give him a shout out. But it's hardest to get to the celebrities, like the Dalai Lama is a celebrity. It helps if you're a celebrity.
Sure.
Or, what I found with the Pope, if you're a donor, if you're a big money donor, you can get to the front of the line.
Right.
But it's harder, unless you have, if you know somebody. I got to Sri Ravi Shankar, perhaps the most well-known guru in India right now, but it's because I knew somebody.
Right, you had a connection.
A friend of a friend got me in.
Sure. Now, how important was it to you to have non-believers involved?
Oh, it's very important. It's a part of the whole belief spectrum, So I talk to atheists and agnostics or secular humanists, but I try to get kind of like 2 of everything, kind of like Noah's Ark.
Sure, balance.
2 atheists, 2 Catholics, 2 Sikhs, 2 Muslims, etc. So essentially I wanted you or the audience to be able to hear the perspective of the world. Here's a collection of the world's beliefs and ideas. You judge.
Sure.
Here they are.
Yeah. Now, do you find that people are more skeptical now of interviewers? when you go in and ask something so personal, because you know there's movies like Borat where people are getting made fun of, and there's a lot of like news shows that twist the words that people are saying or edit them a certain way.
Yeah, you know what? It's really ironic. I was hassled more in the United States and England probably. You know, hey, what are you doing with that camera? You can't film in here, stuff like that. Whereas in China, where it's actually illegal for me to do interviews without government approval, I was never hassled once.
So interesting.
Not one time. And I attribute that to reality shows, which are very prevalent, you know, here. They're not in China yet so much. And so people are very aware of the camera here and more wary of the camera because it tends to bring humiliation.
Sure.
Because that's what a reality show is about, public humiliation.
Right, right. Now, how would you typify where we are today between believers and non-believers? Do you think that the gap is closing, or do you think it's just been, you know, split wide open and people are so far on opposite ends of the spectrum?
I think we've had some of both going on. I think the gap has increased, but more people have been moved to the center as well. So it's really what happens is the shape of the bell curve has changed, you know, over time. Now, what does that mean for, you know, belief? I think people will always believe in things. There will always be religion. There's always going to be supernatural belief in superstition and things like that. That's never going to go away. But what happens is that science has now provided explanations for things that used to be exclusively the domain of religion. And as science keeps encroaching on religion's territory, there's some pushback, you know, like evolution versus the creationists. You know, they're fighting over territory. Who's going to win out ultimately? Maybe who's ever got the most evidence.
Right. Interesting. Now, you're an editor as well, so how important is it to you to be able to edit your own work as a filmmaker?
I started editing my own work because I couldn't afford to hire an editor in the first place. And then I didn't trust anybody. Once I learned how to do it, I thought, oh, I can do this. And so it's now just become an integral part of what I do. I feel like editing and storytelling are so intertwined. The editor does the final rewrite of the script, or whatever it is. If it's a documentary, the final story rewrite of the story. So in this case, I did team up with another editor who I found who is a filmmaker. He's not just an editor, he's a fellow filmmaker, so he's a storyteller. It's really about being able to tell a story. That's what makes a good editor. Now
let's talk about the DVD, because it's coming out, and our audience always likes to know about the special features. Is there any particular special feature that you would say is one you should watch?
Well, there's the behind the scenes, the making of, which shows me and my co-editor, co-producer Paul Tarantino at each other's throats on the road, which is always fun because conflict is story, right? And we had lots of it because we came from different philosophical perspectives in making this film. And we traveled the world together, and we shared cozy B&Bs across Europe, which I learned in sharing a room with my co-producer Paul. I had to make sure the beds were at least 18 inches apart.
Was he a snorer?
You know, he flops around like a fish on a frying pan while he's sleeping, and if the gap wasn't large enough, there was a danger he'd land on my bed.
Oh, no.
Kind of like that scene from Planes, Trains, and Automobiles I wanted to avoid. So that was one lesson for me that came out of making this movie.
Well, it's interesting that you say that the behind the scenes shows that element, because, you know, I felt like you didn't put yourself into the documentary that much. You know, a lot of filmmakers like Michael Moore, he's all over his films. And it's nice to kind of let the people do the talking, and so I appreciate that. But it's nice to also see the humanity of it too, and the real struggles you made in putting it together.
That's where you'll see it. I mean, there's also, of course, an entire bonus disc on the special edition with 80 minutes of deleted scenes.
I imagine there was tons of interviews that, you know, you would have liked to have used, but you have
to
cut.
Those aren't even the interviews. Those are the profiles I did, or the expanded profiles on the people in the movie. Then, for the bonus interviews, there's a 7-disc companion set, 14 hours of footage, which is going to accompany the release, a completely separate release, because when I finished the film, I found that I had so much great material. I thought, I wonder how much this will fill up. And I started cutting, and pretty soon I had 7 full discs. Of more, which I think information, which I think is just as fascinating.
And this is over the course of 6 years you made the film?
While traveling, doing 170 interviews over a 4-year period. I collected 450 hours of interviews, and people talking about, you know, the biggest questions that I could think of. You know, where is the afterlife located? What's the point of everything? You know, define truth or morality or faith. And what is the soul? And how does it work? How does it get from our brain into the cloud or wherever it goes. And so people talking about these things, I find endlessly fascinating.
Cool. Now let's talk about you as a geek, because our show is DVD Geeks. Is there anything that you're passionate about, that you're particularly geeky about, or are there any types of movies that are on your bookshelves?
Well, I'm totally, I guess, a sci-fi geek. I've always been a science fiction fan, and I got that from my dad. I remember watching sci-fi movies with him when I was a kid, and he got me hooked on it. And so things like Star Trek, for instance, was one of the many things I liked as a child, but I also liked The Time Tunnel and Land of the Giants, UFO, Space 1999, all the, the sci-fi greats from the 70s and 80s. That's, that's what I was really consuming when I was young.
Well, thank you so much for joining us and talking about the nature of existence. And where can people find it if they want to purchase the DVD or check out all those hours of special features?
If you want to get the DVD for yourself or send me an email, I'd love to hear from you. thenatureofexistence.com. It's just the name of the film.com. There's a store there. You can click on all the questions. They're all listed there, and you can post your answers to the question or drop me an email. Okay,
one last question. We do a thing on the show called the 2-word blurb, and we use 2 words to describe a movie. If you could do that for your film, what would it be?
Can I use 3?
It's cheating a little bit, but I guess we can
I'm going to
make
hyphenate
an exception.
them.
Sure.
Well, I mean, here's how the film is really a spiritual comedy. How about that? There's 2
I
words.
like that.
Have you ever heard of that combination before?
Not really.
A spiritual comedy.
Breaking new ground. Cool.